Welcome to Open Heart Conversations. I'm Reverend Dr. Jose Miguel Roman, Spiritual Counsel at the United Palace of Spiritual Arts. Today, I have the pleasure of welcoming back our co-host, Bishop Heather Shea, the Chief Executive Officer and Spiritual Director of the United Palace of Spiritual Arts. Welcome
Thank you,
back.
Jose. Great being here today. Looking forward to this program.
Indeed, so am I. Today is a very special program indeed, specifically on Tibetan Buddhism. And with us is one of the foremost experts on this tradition, Dr. Robert Thurman. Dr. Robert Thurman is professor of Indo-Tibetan Buddhist Studies in the Department of Religion at Columbia University.
Emeritus.
Emeritus.
Yes.
Thank you, emeritus. As well as president of the American Institute of Buddhist Studies, a nonprofit affiliated with the Center for Buddhist Studies at Columbia University. He is also the co-founder and president of Tibet House, USA. In 1997, Time magazine chose Professor Thurman as one of its 25 most influential Americans, describing him, and I quote, as a larger-than-life scholar activist destined to convey the Dharma, the precious teachings of Shakyamuni Buddha.
I was a little overweight in those days. That's what larger than life means.
The New York Times has referred to Dr. Thurman as, and I quote, the leading American expert on Tibetan Buddhism. A gifted teacher and speaker, Dr. Thurman is also the author of numerous books on Tibet, Buddhism, art, politics, and culture. And for purposes of complete transparency, his work has had a profound impact on my own personal life and spiritual development. His own search for enlightenment began when he was a student at Harvard University. After an incident in which he lost the use of an eye, Dr. Thurman left school on a spiritual quest that took him through Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. He found his way to India, where he first saw His Holiness the Dalai Lama in 1962. After learning Tibetan and studying Buddhism, he decided to become a Tibetan monk and was the first Westerner to be ordained by the Dalai Lama. However, after some years, he offered up his robes and committed himself to the American equivalent of the monastery, the university. He returned to Harvard and finished his PhD. In 1987, he co-founded Tibet House, a nonprofit organization in New York City dedicated to the preservation and renaissance of Tibetan civilization. Tibet House maintains a small, beautiful museum and cultural center and offers programs on Tibetan art, culture, and science. It recently founded the Menla Retreat and Dewa Spa in the Catskill Mountains to advance the healing arts and wisdom of Tibetan and Asian medicine traditions. All of Dr. Thurman's teaching and activism has always seemed to me simply in service of a vision defined by Buddhism's, what Buddhism calls compassion, wisdom, and peace. Dr. Thurman, welcome to Open Heart Conversations.
Well, thank you, Don Jose Miguel. I appreciate being with you and with Heather and with your wonderful group at the Millennium Palace.
Excellent. Thank you, sir.
And I didn't realize it was a ministry because everyone is a reverend, but that's really nice.
Absolutely. The United Palace of Spiritual Arts continues to be one of New York's premier centers of spiritual exploration and celebration.
Yes, I have a fantasy of bringing His Holiness the Dalai Lama and the Archpatriarch Bartholomew and the Pope Francis and a bunch of other important Muslim, Jews, and Hindus, etc., to that palace for a conclave next year when we are back onto a more sane path in governance in the world. And I have a fantasy about it.
Well, we would welcome that fantasy, and anything that we can do to help you manifest it, we're there.
Absolutely.
Well,
Absolutely.
I'm $500,000 short, but I plan to rectify that. So don't worry. And also, they wouldn't come right now. It's too crazy. But maybe next year. I was told by my psychic friend that I'm going to be really happy next year. And then I said, "You mean what? You mean I'm going to be dead at 80?" And they said, "No, the world will be back on the right track," they said. And they said they wanted to tell me that, the people who speak through that psychic friend of mine, they wished to tell me that fact, so as to encourage me, because they said, this was the last year, they said, until then, you're going to be crazy with busy. And it's amazing. Even in the lockdown, I've been so busy online. It's incredible.
It's
Your program
Anyway, it's all has no value at all. It is just my fantasy.
No. Well, Dr. Thurman, our first question is very simple.
Yes, sure.
The Buddha is said to have existed 2,500 years ago.
Yes.
What makes you think his teachings have any relevance to humanity in the 21st century?
Well, first thing is, as the great Buddhist master Nagarjuna, and great world philosopher, actually, not just Buddhist, who lived about 2,000 years ago, and supposedly lived for 600 years, actually, although modern scholars are so bollocksed up about it. They think there were three of them. You know, there was a reincarnation, and somehow they think the Indians didn't bother to make note of that fact. But never mind that. But anyway, as he said, time itself is only relative. And all the past is actually still here with us, both positive and negative aspects. We notice we still have the Civil War here with us in the U.S., for example. That's over 150 years ago, 170 years ago, and it's still here, you know. And we go back, you know, Native American genocide, you know, what have you, you know, conquest of England by the Normans. I mean, all of these historical things are here. The past never disappears. It's whether or not we have it written down, it's in people's minds, in their genes, in their subtle unconscious, and we have to deal with it. And so what the Buddha was really was a kind of physician. He was a doctor of the mind. He wasn't really a prophet. And poor Max Weber, when he did the social psychology of world religions, he couldn't figure out how to classify Buddha. So he said he wasn't an emissary prophet, he was an exemplary prophet, because he had to be a prophet which founds a religion. But actually he wasn't a prophet at all, the Buddha. Actually, he was more like a doctor. And what he taught was how to cheer up, basically. A psychology of how to overcome suffering, and by understanding its causes, like just any medical analysis, and by a therapy that would undo those causes and would be the cause, but in a way you can't cause freedom from suffering, because his insight and his teaching was that the third noble truth, or the freedom from suffering, is reality, actually. And so you don't need to cause it, it's already there. It's just you have to come to understand it, that's all. So it's just totally just as relevant. And it's a nice thing, actually, that primarily it is a kind of therapy, a kind of, you know, people will say it's a way of life, it's a philosophy, it's a this and it's a that. It is, and it is all of those things. And it has a side effect of being religious for some people who can't directly undergo the therapy, which involves education. And in some eras in history, people have not been able to undergo that education. And then they believe that the people who are undergoing it are valuable and they support them. And for them, it becomes a kind of religion. But for the people who are undergoing the education, it isn't really a religion. It's really a learning and an unlearning of a misknowledge, of a delusory way of dealing with life, and finding the reality of life. And it turns out, happy news is, if you know the reality of life, it's great. It's not bad. Even death is okay. It's just part of it. And it's a little bit traumatic, like, like diving off, a high-level diving board, 20-foot diving board. That's traumatic. But then you plunge in the water and you're not so bad. Okay. Anyway, I'm sorry I answered too long. I shouldn't do that.
No, it's magnificent. Not at all.
Go ahead.
And Dr. Say a little bit more about Buddha. Who was Buddha? Where did he come
Buddha
from?
was, Buddha was an extraordinary person to start with. He was like a Mozart, or a prodigy, Einstein, Mozart, something like that. And he was raised to be a prince, a king, and a general. And it was predicted father when he was a baby by very efficient and effective Indian soothsayers that he would either conquer a huge empire, and the father really liked the sound of that, as he was a king himself, or he would become a Buddha, an enlightened being, and he would help a lot of people. And the father didn't quite, I mean, the father was a nice person and liked to help people, but he didn't really kind of know what that was, a Buddha helping people. As far as he knew, the best way to help them was to rule them well. That's his job as a king. You know, unfortunately, a king also is a commander-in-chief, even those days. And so, as the job of a king, you have to be ready to fight wars with neighbors. In those days, you know, India in those days was like Greece. It had these city-state kingdoms that would often fight each other, like, you know, Athens and Sparta and this sort of thing. That's how India was. It wasn't one country. And so Buddha, if he had stayed as a king, he would have had to defend the country, and he probably would naturally have overrun some other ones because he was such a great, whatever he did it really well. But then what happened was, so then the father made a huge effort to keep the Buddha in his palace. And he saw to every kind of pleasure that an adolescent or a child would want, or even a grown-up. And then he became very happily married. He fell very much in love with a beautiful woman who fell very much in love with him. And they married, and they had a lot of fun, and then they eventually had a child. And then the crisis came to him, because in the Indian system, when you have a child, especially a son, because it's patriarchal society in those days, then the king would abdicate and go to an ashram, and the son, the father of the new prince, would be the king. So the guy king would go to Florida, go to Miami on a vacation. So he was very happy when Buddha had a son. Buddha and Yashoda, his wife, had a son. And he said, great, that's wonderful. I'll see you around. I'm heading off for a permanent vacation. And Buddha said, Dad, I'm really sorry. I would love for you to have a vacation, but I'm going on vacation because I don't want to be king. So what? You don't want to be king? You are king. You have to be. That's your job. He says, no, I'm sorry. You said, okay, why not? The father said. Then he said, well, you told me I was brought up as a king. I have to help people with their problems, and I have to see that they have a good life. And that's my duty for my citizens, my subjects. But I have observed that I'm not going to be able to have them have a good life as a king. All I do is defend them and see to the economy, but that's not their real problem. Their problem, though, the problem of birth, aging, sickness, death, anxiety, meeting unpleasant people, losing pleasant people, etc. He listed a whole bunch of things. And he said, as a king, I can't particularly do anything about that, but that's what I want to do something about. So then the king said to his son, he said, well, son, you're worrying about a bunch of unnecessary things. We have high priests. We have all kinds of Brahmins, and they intercede with the gods. And then they see to it that the people deal with those problems, the existential problems that you're talking about. That's not our job. And Buddha says, well, if the high priests are taking care of it, and the gods are supposed to take care of it, they're not doing a very good job. And I think I can do a better job, and I'm going to go find out how to do it. I'm going to become enlightened, and I'm going to do it. So then the father did what they do in that situation. He locked him up and sent in a bunch of psychiatrists. And the king said, oh, sorry. I mean, and then Buddha escaped, actually. Supposedly he had supernormal help, so, divine help. But anyway, the way they tell the story. But anyway, he did escape. And he went off, cut off his hair, gave up all his jewels, gave up his clothes, actually, his royal clothes, his horse. Horse almost died of grief. Horse really liked him. And then he went off as a mendicant. People say monk, but that's not really correct. That's a Christian term and indicates someone who wants to go to solitude. But a mendicant is someone simply who seeks higher life and then asks for free food from people and exemption from military and taxes and family duties. It's kind of bad. He abandoned, of course, his wife and son for that time, saying that he would do more for them in the long run than he could do as a father and a family, and also knowing that they would be well taken care of in the royal family. So they were not destitute or anything, but that's a kind of bad thing. But that was part of the shock of him having to drop out of the ordinary sort of culture with the family life and family system and his sort of inherited duty and the patriarchal thing. You know, like Jesus, Buddha was born in, his mother was not claimed to be a virgin. She was the chief queen of the king. But the king was not involved in his conception, according to the legend. And that's, of course, in mythic stories or real stories, whatever, that's a symbol of a leader who is going to shatter some of the patriarchal traditions. You know, Joseph Campbell and those kind of people pointed that out. And Buddha also had that, he shares that with Jesus, that particular detail. Actually, there are some Japanese scholars who studied all the apocryphal gospels and everything, and there are 22 different characteristics of the Buddha story that is similar to the Jesus story. The big difference, of course, is Buddha is not crucified, although actually some people try to destroy him, but they fail. And one, and then two, therefore he gets to teach for 45 years or 46 years after his enlightenment. His therapy, his understanding of the human problem, and the problem of self-centeredness as a psychological sort of scientific understanding of it, and how to heal it, how to give therapy to it, and that human beings have the capability of overcoming the certain type of sick self-centeredness, which enables them to then understand how they really are a relative being interconnected with all other beings. That's the basis of the therapy, and human beings capable of succeeding at that therapy. So then he's founded his institution of mendicancy, and India luckily had a very wealthy economy. It was the most wealthy of all agricultural economies in all of Eurasia, actually, was India, with its big river valleys, that it had. And so there was a surplus of food and a shortage of freezers. And therefore, people were happy to give it away to the mendicants. And lots of them joined up, and it had a revolutionary effect in Indian civilization, actually. And which was very good for Indian civilization. They produced so many great things. But the one bad thing about it in the old world was that when you became more civilized and you became more gentle and you became more loving and more compassionate and more kind and more happy, then you became more vulnerable to people who were unhappy and unkind and violent and had warrior fighters and this kind of thing. And so gradually India became more vulnerable. And by the 11th century of the Common Era, approximately, it was overrun by people who really crushed the Buddhist institutions. And they set back the general Indian ones as well. And right up through to the British for 1,000 years, Mughals and Persians and Tajiks and then French and Portuguese and English just kept trampling on India,
Right.
And the Indians kept eating their mangoes and singing their ragas. And only lately are they beginning to show their ability.
Dr. Thurman, in the Buddha's life, it seems to me,
yes,
they're almost it's almost cut in two halves. And the great moment in his life occurs, they say, below that Bodhi tree. Something remarkable happened after he studied for over 5 years. He becomes a mendicant monk, spends about 5-6 years studying and doing all kinds of austerities. And then he sits below a Bodhi tree and something transforms him. He sits down, Shakyamuni Buddha, right? He sits down Siddhartha Gautama, and he arises Shakyamuni Buddha.
Yes.
What happened
in one night? In one night, actually, they say. And he found it was much easier than he had thought. And one very important thing is he receives a meal from a beautiful village girl who at first thought he was a demon because he was so scrawny, but who nursed him back to health and gave him some wonderful food. And somehow, you know, he managed to balance the extremes. When he had been a prince, he had been so much indulged in every kind of pleasure and every kind of, you know, indulgence from all levels, you know, including sexual, you know, like harems and things. And then then he got bored with that, and so had then also had a happy marriage. And then he parenting, he became a father. And so he had really everything you could want in a worldly thing, wealth and everything. And then he completely, you know, destroyed himself practically. A lesser person might have died. He came close to death. And starving himself and really extreme asceticism. And then he realized, then he collapsed kind of, and then he was fed by a woman. And she gave him this, Sujata was her name. And she gave him this, and then he went feeling more healthy. He took a bath, actually. His ascetic companions, the 5 of them, they abandoned him. They thought he had copped out of their punishing the body routine. And he got he sat and found a middle way, and he relaxed. And he kind of looked carefully at things. And then he understood the nature of the world. That is what happened to him. So he realized that we can do that. We're terrorized, actually. Human beings in the societies we have known, all of them, are terrorized by authoritarian cultures, which are both have often authoritarian versions of spirituality and authoritarian versions of governance, militaristic and authoritarian versions of governance, patriarchal, also, I might add, male-dominated, and mostly. And they're terrorized to be told and to be brought up and to be educated that we cannot understand the world, you know? And when I was in my brick church, my Presbyterian church as a kid, and I used to argue with the preacher there, minister, Reverend Niebrugge, I remember his name, and he used to tell me, you can't understand. And, well, I said, well, who does understand? Oh, God understands. Well, why can't I understand it? Well, you just can't. And I said, really? But how do you know that if you don't understand? I told him. And then what makes you think so? Oh, that's what they say. Yeah, maybe they say that, but I don't think God is mean like that. Why would he exclude, if he can understand, why would he exclude us from understanding? So I rejected that idea. And then I went to school, and the scientists got after me, and I liked them too. And they said, oh yeah, you can understand how many angels on the head of this atom, or how many germs in this virus, or, you know, whatever. You can understand all these things. Although in those days, that was before even we knew about genes, you know, about the DNA and RNA and all that. We were so talking about dark ages, the 1950s, 40s. And but you can't understand everything. No. You know, then when you know little, then you know how much more you don't know.
You use the term enlightenment. What is enlightenment?
Enlightenment is understanding the world. It's as easy as that. And basically, it's the discovery of the relativity of the world. And relativity doesn't just mean light photons zapping around, bouncing off at their absolute top speed, as Einstein's level of relativity. Relativity means you and I, Heather, and Don Jose Miguel, and the other gentleman, we're all interrelated. We are 100% interrelated. No one of us has anything absolutely different from anybody else. And our existence completely interdepends on each other. Thich Nhat Hanh has a wonderful expression for it in English, with the great Vietnamese teacher, he calls it interbeing. So that's what reality is, and enlightenment is knowing that. And unenlightenment, which means misknowing, is Bob Thurman thinks there's a Bob Thurman me that is completely different from everything else, and it's all different from me, and actually, therefore, it's kind of my basic absolute concern is me. And that me is an unchanging fixed thing. Maybe I call it my soul, maybe I call it my identity, maybe I want to call it people that they wanted when they first discovered DNA. They wanted to say it's my unchanging DNA. They acted like it would be unchanging, and you went through once you could analyze it, you could then control people's health, which is, of course, ridiculous, but didn't happen because one's DNA is always changing, interconnected with everything. So point is, that's what enlightenment is knowing that completely. Not just having a theory about it, but experiencing it and feeling interrelated with everything. And the minute you feel interrelated with everything, you realize that it's there, everything is wonderful. And other beings are beautiful, and you love them. And you realize you're not that bad, usually, when you're in a better mood, and when you're loving to them. And you begin to connect to things. And you realize that we're in this marvelous planet. And right now I'm breathing because those trees out there are making oxygen, and they're taking my exhalation carbon, and they're making leaves out of that, along with the help of the sun and a few things, a little water. And it's just perfect for us to thrive in if we don't get too greedy and crazy. Unfortunately, when we think we're absolutely separate from everything, we're in a horrible situation where potentially everything is against us. So in a way, it's a battle between us and the world. And therefore, we're greedy, we want to have more of it that we own or control, or we somehow make our own to feel a little less overwhelmed and outnumbered. But no amount can possibly help because it's infinite, the world. It's not limited. That's ridiculous that there's only so many stars. Silly. And yes. And then we get angry because we think others want to incorporate us into their separate world. So it's what enlightenment is knowing there is no such separation except as a play, as a kind of illusion, like a drama in a theater or a movie, and that really we're all interconnected, and we're one. But each one of us, as a human, gets to understand being the same as everybody else in our own way. So we each have our own kind of enlightenment, which is fun, relatively speaking, our own enlightenment. Okay?
And once the Buddha achieved his enlightenment,
yes,
he develops this thing called the Four Noble Truths,
right,
which seem to be the very foundation of his teaching. What are the Four Noble Truths? What are these realizations?
Well, really, it's only one truth. And it really is only one truth. And that is the truth of the third one, which is put in the position of the third one. You could translate those words as four noble realities or four noble facts. Truth is not wrong, but putting truth on it makes it sound like it's a credo. You have to believe in it or something. But that's not what it is. It's a diagnosis. And therefore, it's only one truth, really. And that's the truth is that there is such a thing as freedom from all suffering, and that is the birthright of every sentient being, but particularly the human form is an ideal form, better than a divine one, actually, in the Buddha's view. Buddha's never against Buddhists are not atheists. They don't disbelieve in the existence of deities and angels and even demons also, and all hells and things. That Buddhists are completely into that. But they just don't think there's one who can be blamed for everything or given credit for everything. Everyone interdoes it. We all interdo it, and we're constantly interdoing it. So it's really only the one truth, which is the shocking truth, which is that which helps us overcome the terror of the authoritarian societies, Eastern as well as Western. And that terror is you just are inadequate. You cannot understand. You are kind of bad, actually, a lot of them tell people. You'll have all this sin and ignorance, and you're terrible, and you'll never get out of that. But we'll help you, and the government will help you if you just fight our wars and pay our taxes, etc. And we high priests will help you because we have an all-powerful being that is in charge, and that he will help you, or she will help you, in some cultures. And that sort of thing, where you're just helpless, and the life is a veil of tears, and it's enlightened to be resigned to suffering because it's inevitable and all this. That is what the Buddha challenged in the one truth that he taught, which was nirvana. And nirvana doesn't mean we're all leaving and going somewhere else. What nirvana really means is this is nirvana if we know what it is. When we don't know what it is, it's a problem. And therefore, the only problem is not sin, but the only problem is ignorance, although it's different than what we normally think of as ignorance. You know, the first noble truth, the second noble truth is the truth of the cause of the suffering that we experience when we don't know the one noble truth, the nirvana, freedom. But when we suffer because it's us versus the universe. It's not even rocket science.
So, Dr. Thurman,
if it's you versus everyone, you lose.
Right.
That's the first noble truth. But that only means, but it's caused by not knowing what you are, where you are, what the world is, and therefore engaging in a battle with the world to try to overcome what seems to be coming at you and overwhelms you.
Right.
And when you realize it isn't a battle, it's a love fest, actually, really. Ultimately, if you know what it is, then you're fine. You're as happy as a bee, live or die. Even death, you don't mind. It's like, you know, we think when we are alive, we think, when I'm awake, I'm enjoying so many things. I can talk to Heather and Don Jose Miguel, and I can on Zoom, and I can be in Woodstock in the hills, in the mountains, and I can watch Star Trek, Discovery, really neat one, and etc. You know, and I can have fun. And when it's really boring when I fall asleep, it's like dying. I become just unconscious. But it's not that bad. You get rested and you get up and you have more fun. So the point is, dying is just like that. You just get up again and you carry on. And in the West, by the way, they had that in the Mediterranean cultures, they believed that. In Jesus' time, it was common knowledge what was called metempsychosis. And in classical Judaism, they still believe in reincarnation. It's not like it's just some weird thing out of Asia. It's like very common sense, actually. But anyway, that's another story. I'm sorry, I interrupted your follow-up.
No, not at all. That's my problem. Not at all. I appreciate what you're saying. If the central truth is that we have the capacity to overcome suffering,
yes.
How do we do that? What is the path?
We learn what it is, and really fully, like scientists, and we learn what makes us subscribe to it, you could say.
So what is suffering? What is suffering?
Suffering is, you know what it is. It's you stub your toe sometime, you know. All of these things that have to do with resisting. Put it this way: if you're a surfer, which I'm not, because I grew up in New York, not in California. I wish I was. I admire surfers. But if you're a surfer, you learn to sort of position yourself, and you get that wave, and then it's exalting, and you feel one with the ocean, the air, the sun, the wind, and you feel fabulous, and you ride in on that thing. And although there's nothing holding you really up on the thing, you just like flow with it. And then how do you get to be able to do that? Well, you suffer a lot. You fall off. You get trashed by the wave. You try to do it this and that wrong way. You don't know your balance. You get uptight and frightened. You don't let yourself kind of slip into it. And wham, you get thrown on the ground. You can get killed even. And so that's what so when we rigidly are there and we're just feeling all frightened of the wave, and we don't sort of commune with the wave and the wind and its motion and its energy and so forth, then we suffer. And when we learn to fit with it and go with it, it's wonderful. So that's the thing. That's how we learn. But of course, life is more complicated than surfing, although surfing could well be a great lesson in life. So there's what's called an eightfold educational path, which is the fourth noble truth, and which is the way in which we open up to the reality of the third noble truth. And that begins with revising our worldview and looking at what we think the world is, and criticizing all these frightening views and wrong worldviews, like that we're permanent, we never change, that there's an absolute permanent thing that is still relating to us that we have to worry about. We learn the meaning of the word nothing, which is there is no such thing, so we can't become that. We learn, etc. A lot of things. Basically, we learn relativity in a deep, total mental and physical way, with the heart as well as the mind. And once we learn true relativity, we are able to surf life, and we are able to surf things that other people think are suffering, and we can go with them, and they don't become a bother. And actually, you know that yourself. Everyone knows that. That's why, because we're this amazing thing. We're humans. And we didn't get to be this way just like automatic. You know, it was quite complicated to get to be human. It was an evolutionary process. And we did it by trying it out as a tiger or a lion or a crocodile for lots of times. And then we realized the shortcomings of all those life forms. We even were gods at different times. And we found out the shortcomings of those, which is we're really intelligent, but everything seems so easy for us because we're divine. And we spend our time in 10 million year jacuzzis.
That sounds pretty nice, actually.
It does, but it's not good, because then you don't learn to surf, where you can experience, you know, Niagara Falls as a jacuzzi or something. I can't explain it. I know it sounds terrible. That's why, you know, when Buddha first taught the Four Noble Truths to the first people, he knew that they would think that nirvana was somewhere else, because some other thing. So because they couldn't imagine themselves. And of course, when he looked at them, remember, they hadn't had a square meal in 5 years. They hadn't had a bath. They hadn't cut their fingernails or hair. They were a complete mess. He looked at them and said, "This is suffering." It was like an obvious statement in their context. But they thought that was getting them somewhere. But he realized it wasn't. So he said, middle way, guys. Don't torture yourself and don't indulge yourself. And then because you have to be healthy, you have to bake a square meal every day. And then you have to really study yourself and study the world, study the atoms in the world, the subatomic, do your quantum physics, and you'll discover relativity. And they did, actually.
Dr. Thurman, in popular American belief, there is this sense that Buddhism is against desire. That desire is at the core of all suffering.
Yes, that's right.
I've always found that interesting because...
No, but that's not true. That's not Buddhism.
That's what I was going to ask. Because
he doesn't teach that.
Can you speak to that?
This is in the line of what I was saying. This is a good question. You know, when I recently went to Sri Lanka, and I read a lot of Pali suttas, you know, I was saying, you know, so the Buddha let people think for a while that some people, that they were going to go leave the world to be free of suffering. So they were thinking that nirvana was somewhere else, like some deep freezer kind of place where you didn't suffer. Because the world, you can't possibly be in a state of not suffering while you're in the world, which is filled with problems. So he let them think that. Although when they got more strong and more internally happy and more aware of how their mind works, he then let them know, hey, by the way, you don't have to leave town. It's right here when you're capable of understanding it. And then they got that, actually. At first they were, we thought it was over there. And they said, yeah, but over there can't be an absolute state, because if it's over there, it's not here. That means it's relative. So you know, which is a really simple thing to understand, actually. But, you know, people want to feel there's an escape. You know, we're very escapist human beings. That's why they kill themselves. When they're materialists, they tend to kill themselves too easily because they think they're going some other place that's going to be free of problems. You know, nothing, which is nothing. They think they're going to nothing, like existentialists, and that's ridiculous. That's insane, actually, because nothing is nothing. It's not a place you go to. But that's another story. But anyway, in that light, I read one famous sutra of that dualistic type of, understood by people who still do the dualistic trip. They still think they're going somewhere else. And in it, First Noble Truth is a long list of pleasures. And they're all suffering because they don't last. And because they're accompanied not just by desire, they are the objects of desire, but they're accompanied in addition by an extra craving. So that's why the presence of that excessive craving is why that they're suffering. In other words, seeing a beautiful flower is a suffering because the flower doesn't last, and you're looking at it doesn't last, and somebody tramples it or whatever, but that's because you want more of it. Then when he comes to the third noble truth, he says, where is this nirvana? But then he says, but in this case, there's no craving. So you just, if you see a flower, the momentary seeing of it is just fine. You just love it. And you don't crave to see it this next moment. And therefore, it kind of takes you away from your sense of if things are inadequate, I don't have enough, I need more, this sort of excessive feeling of incompleteness. It's complete. Everything you do is completely complete. And you're in that moment, like he was under the Bodhi tree when he looked up and he saw the morning star, which was Venus, by the way, the star of love. They have the same planets. They have the same, astrology that the Westerners do. Indians do. India is the West, actually. They have Indo-European language. Sanskrit is it's like Russian or Slavic or German or something. English.
What's the difference between Tibetan Buddhism and other types of Buddhism?
No, there's not. Actually, in a way, Tibetan Buddhism is sort of a misnomer, but all words are a little bit misnomers, in the sense that from the Tibetan point of view, it is complete, authentic Indian Buddhism, kept alive in its final phase, which you could say has three major phases in its history in India, depending on the maturity of Indian civilization, going toward what civilization should really be, which is a culture, human culture of gentleness, wisdom, justice, equality, kindness, love, compassion. That's what wisdom. That's what civilization should be. Civilization is not having subways. Civilization is those qualities in life, And but India was way ahead, there's no doubt. And therefore they suffered against the militarism of all the conquerors, in the last 1,000 years. So the difference only is that this was crushed in India because of the vulnerability and gentleness of the people. And however, it thrived in China, in Southeast Asia, and continued in Sri Lanka in a lesser form than it had been in Sri Lanka. In Sri Lanka originally it was all three forms of Buddhism, Theravada, Mahayana, and Vajrayana. But after it was that synthesis was crushed in India, it then reverted to just being Theravada. And then in the East Asia, they didn't get as strong a sense of Theravada as they should have had, as they had in India. So in India, the three types of Buddhism were very beautifully connected in the last 500 years of its time there. And that's the version of Buddhism that Tibet embraced, and because the Indians gave it to them, because the Indians realized, the leaders, the most enlightened ones, what they call the adepts, the siddhas, the fully enlightened ones, they realized that the Indian society was getting too vulnerable, and that people were attracted to it by the beauty and brilliance of the culture, and they were coming to get it, And then they would, of course, try to arrange it in their own way and domineer it and dominate it. And, you can't dominate people. People are free, have to be free.
Tibetan Buddhism is said to be defined by many, many things, especially something called Lamaism.
Let me just finish one thing. Let me give my kind of bottom line, which is that this took me maybe 30, 40 years, and I'm not enlightened, I don't pretend to be, but I'm a little more oriented toward it, let's say. And it took me maybe 40 years of studying it to finally realize, and teaching it, which is a great way of studying, if you learn more every time you teach it, and that is that Buddhism considers happiness the rule. And Buddha is the great defender of happiness, like Matthew Ricard, like the Dalai Lama. Even in the midst of adversity, he is the defender of happiness. He only has the a reputation that he's teaching suffering. And that's the opposite. Buddhism says you should be happy. It says you should cheer up. And that if you are suffering, it's because you don't know what's going on, but you can find out. That's the whole thing. And then once you find out, you're going to be happy. Even some person like me who is unenlightened, but I sort of am oriented toward it, and I see the sensibility of it, the common sense logicality of that message, that cheers me up a lot. And I can argue it and defend it too, even though I don't really enjoy it that much. Because I don't know it with the full level of viscera, from the gut, because I've been like a ivory tower person.
What does it mean to say that the Dalai Lama is the incarnation of the Buddha of compassion?
Right. So what that means is, again, that's another shocker to Westerners, that only one, And I can tell you that I have been translated for Buddhist lamas in interfaith dialogues. And it remains an endless mystery to them in talking with theologians and priests and monks and people. They say, your God is, in your belief system, is omnipotent, right? Yes. And yet you insist he only had one son? Yes. How can you do that? And then there are all theories, Christologies and God knows what. And they just shake their heads. And they say, well, okay, that makes sense in your terms for this time and for those people for whom that's taught and helpful. But do you think God might change his mind once in a while? Is he allowed to have a daughter or something? You know what I mean? So the point is that there are many Buddhas, not just one Buddha, because reality is beginningless. Life is beginningless. Just this planet is not beginningless. The sun, etc. There's a history of cycles, big bangs, big crunches. I'm not sure about the bang really, but sort of big evolutions and big devolutions, emergences and collapses and disintegrations, yes. But then that doesn't mean that life started just in this one solar system or in this one galaxy. There's infinite life, and it's infinite in that view, which is pretty easy to figure out, actually. And therefore, there are many Buddhas, and there are many gods, and they're very powerful, and they incarnate in a sense. And what incarnation means, it doesn't just mean be reborn, because every being is reborn in the Buddhist science, Buddhist biology. The mind is a sort of subtle thing. It doesn't have no energy. It's not non-material in the sense of no energy. It has energy, but it doesn't have coarse material, but it inhabits coarse material. And coarse material is its instrument of learning and living and experiencing. And there's subtle forms of that and coarse forms of that. And the human is one very, very elaborated and evolved form of that. But other animals also are. And other animals definitely have souls, like Albert Schweitzer insisted, and as do humans. And so, therefore, if someone becomes completely one with all this infinite life, in a sense, develops a sense of infinite life, then they're not going to leave and abandon people. And this particular body that they would have has a human lifespan, and they would abandon that. Even divine bodies have a divine lifespan, and then they change them. And it was material things, that's their nature, the nature of energy. It's like that. But the incarnation means they voluntarily manifest different embodiments and lives in different worlds. And there are images in Buddhist literature of the Buddha being present on other planets and talking to other people in the vision of people on this planet, which he shows them. He gives them a kind of temporary glimpse of that, in order to encourage them that they're not the only lonely ones in the universe trying to figure this stuff out. And so way back in that ancient literature, they have the equivalent of like Star Trek, They do, but they don't have a metal machine that flies around.
What does it mean to say, no, please, you are actually answering.
Yeah, so that means the incarnation, yeah. So therefore, that's why it's not understandable to Buddhists that the Lord of perfect compassion, and they're perfectly willing to say Jesus can be that. They're not against it. But that's the only one. This seems crazy to them, because love is all powerful. I mean, in John's gospel, he says God is love, right? And the Buddhists view what they call the clear light of the void, the diamond energy that is infinite. And it's very confusing because it's a little bit paradoxical, like things in life. Because it's infinite, it doesn't do anything, because everything's already perfect and done. In its perspective, to say it, I'm saying it not to personalize it too much, because it's infinite, and but it is available for any need to be fulfilled, to draw from it inexhaustibly, is the idea of this infinite energy. And that's a definition of love to a Buddhist. Love is the will to the happiness of the beloved. And so happiness, if the beloved needs this to be happy or that to be happy, this infinite energy inexhaustibly provides it to them. So therefore, a compassionate, infinite, all-powerful being, why would they only incarnate in one form? And then promise to come back, and some people interpret that in a really grisly manner, and instead of being everywhere for everyone. And why speak one language? And it's just inconceivable to a Buddhist, because precisely the culture that is more abundant, that doesn't feel so strong a need to terrorize the citizens to stay in line and follow the leader and sacrifice their personal whatever freedom in order to produce or to win the war or to whatever it is, sacrifice themselves. The culture that is more ready to be generous with everyone, a culture that will support mendicants with a lifelong free lunch as long as they're pursuing something good. That culture would not institute idea that love and compassion will only have one incarnation at one time for one people. It's just considered selling God short, if you believe in an omnipotent, loving God, and it's selling the clear light of the void, clear light of emptiness, which is not nothingness. It's relativity, the clear light of infinite relativity. The infinite energy of infinite relativity, selling that short. Right. And so that's the understanding of it. And now the Dalai Lama is only one of numberless incarnations. You see that icon behind me, which was by accident. I didn't realize, so you can't really see it now, the way the lighting is. This icon behind me there. Oh, I can't, that badly did, I'm sorry. Anyway, yes, you can see it.
Yes,
I was looking in the wrong thing. Yeah, that is called the thousand-armed, thousand-eyed Avalokiteshvara. And Avalokiteshvara is an interesting name, and besides being unpronounceable, but for most people. But Ishvara means God, actually. And the creator in Indian monotheism, and there are various types, is called Maha-Ishvara, the great Ishvara. And Ishvara means powerful, all-powerful, Ishvara. So Maha-Ishvara, the great God, And Avalokita, it means the God, not the great one, but the God who looks down with worrying kindness, with loving awareness on beings. In other words, the loving God, Avalokita, is looking out for people. Do you know what I mean? He's not just being great. So it's kind of a critique of the authoritarian version of the divine that world religions tend to inflict in different eras and periods on them, on the people, to boss them around and dominate them. Whereas the idea that the divine, loving, just wants to give everything to everyone, and that the world is the gift of that one. I think the true mystics, which were the early scientists who felt that they'd been given the planet, they'd been given all these life forms, and they could learn God's wisdom through looking at the way the world works, and that there's shadows on the moon, and that the earth goes around the sun, and Galileo's out there looking at his telescope. They're like mystics, those scientists, actually, even though they rejected the Inquisition and the domineering version of religion. And believe me, there's domineering versions of Buddhism too. And they did it. there's one funny story that one traveler in eastern Tibet, modern one, not ancient one, he went to some village, but before the Chinese came there, some British guy, and he wanted to meet the abbot of a certain monastery in eastern Tibet, who he'd heard something about, or he'd met him. He was invited to go there, met him in Lhasa, and then he went to his monastery. And he came there, and he wasn't at home in the monastery. So he said to the chancellor, the chamberlain, he said, "Where's the Lama?" And he said, "Oh, he's in town. He went off to the town, Chamdo." Oh, really? What's he doing in town? And then the guy said, "Oh, he's terrorizing the citizens." And then he said, "Well, what do you mean by that?" "Oh, he's telling them about if they don't give something to the monastery, if they don't give gifts, if they don't behave themselves, then they'll go to hell, or they'll have a bad life, or this and that, and misfortune will befall them." And so he's going down to raise some mendicant. He's a mendicant, he's raising some funds for the monastery. So even, so all of them, any kind of authority structure tends to want to do that, to make itself important. But everywhere there are these terrible things that happen when people misuse these beautiful things that these great incarnations of compassion, love, do.
So Dr. Thurman, before we leave today, I'd like to ask you about consciousness. You've sort of talked around it, but just could you explain what consciousness is, or how
consciousness, well, it's a very complicated thing for people who think there isn't any such thing. Like all the materialist scientists. Right now we're having Zoom consciousness, all four of us. And we're sitting here looking at each other in Zoom, and I'm talking too much, I apologize. But that's the gig just now. And so, we know what's going on. We're aware of each other. And actually, consciousness is what the human embodiment is the best instrument for at the moment. And we therefore should be super proud of being human, actually. And not that animals don't have souls and aren't going to be human and have been human, and, we should be taking care of them. That doesn't mean we should kill them all and leave somehow. If we eat them all, then they'll all be human. No. They themselves are going to be reborn human, for definitely, sooner or later. And anything we can do to help that is good. And the way you do that is you find them in the bardo. In the between death and rebirth state. But anyway, consciousness is that. And consciousness is wild because, for example, right now, when you look at the sky, if you just look up quickly at the sky, for a moment, you are the sky. But you quickly say, "Oh, sky," and me looking. So your conceptualization jumps in and walls you off from being the sky. But your consciousness is visual one. That's why we're very much a visual. It becomes everything it sees. And that when you go to the symphony or you go to a great Indian raga, Ravi Shankar, you flow down the Ganges with this beautiful music, or you go into the joyful vision of Mozart, or Beethoven when he's cheery, when he's not deaf, so consciousness is bigger than the body, actually, always. But the human body is able to encompass that bigness and able to use concepts to understand the concepts and to free themselves from being imprisoned by this and that concept, actually. And the Buddhist psychology as a therapy and a psychology is extremely helpful for that. And just finally, I want to say, because this is the context of Millennium Palace, wonderful sort of interfaith movement and spiritual movement, which I deeply love, and so does His Holiness. It's just so important to overcome this ridiculous thing of religions, world religions, thinking they're in competition, because their founders only lived to serve their people, and their teachings that reverberate beyond their life because of our marvelous human gift of language, they folk memorized and written. They are serving people. But then when they become big institutions, the administrators of the institutions think they own the people. So then they want to increase their market share, their subjects, their people they're dominating. And then they feel that, oh, the other one is going to compete with me and convert my people, and I got to go convert them. And then they have wars, and then it's terrible. It's just awful. And neither Jesus, nor Buddha, nor Muhammad, nor any of those teachers of Moses, they would hate that. The Dalai Lama just sits and he cries. You can go on YouTube and you can see him talking to the governor of Orissa. And he's trying to be nice cheery with the governor of Orissa, but he just heard about Yemen or something on some TV in the hotel probably. And so he starts practically crying about people like killing each other, religion.
Let me ask you one near final question, Dr. Thurman. After so many years of commitment to this path, what is it that keeps you so passionate about it? I mean, it's extraordinary. Yeah.
Well, it's just, because, no, I'm not really that passionate, but I love it, yes. I get more so because it's so helpful, and it has been so helpful to me, and therefore I feel so grateful to the Tibetan civilization, because I don't remember having lived in India. I'm sure I did, actually. It's interesting, when I went on my first quest, after I lost my one eye, and by the way, my Mongolian original teacher before the Dalai Lama became my teacher, my first introducing teacher, he told me, he said, whenever anybody asks you about your eye or it is mentioned, just say, and you do it, I'm ordering you. He says, Mongolians, they're like that. He says, I lost one and I gained 1,000. Just say it. Don't be embarrassed, he said. And that's this icon over here, He has 1,000 eyes mean the eyes of 1,000 Buddhas in this world, in this particular cycle of the world. And the 1,000 hands mean the 1,000 loving arms of the wheel-turning kings, who are the good kings. Because there have been good rulers. Not everybody is an idiot.
You said that you have kept to this path because it's done so much for you. Can you speak a little bit about that? What has it done for you?
Well, I'm just a bit more cheery than I was. I'll put it this way, they said in that other thing you read, a larger than life, because in the 90s and 80s I was a bit overweight. Well, once when I was in my 30s, I was having dinner. My Mongolian teacher in New Jersey had not left yet. My Karate Kid type New Jersey Mongolian teacher was so great. Sanjay Senimutagishi Wangel was his name. And he taught at Columbia too, the language, for a while. And but I didn't meet him there, unfortunately. But wait, what was I going to say? I lost track. Oh yeah. I was boasting because I was overeating, eating too much food. And because it was a delicious meal, and I was gobbling it down. And then I was boasting, I can eat as much as I like, and I'll always stay thin. And he overheard that, and he from other part of the table, he says, oh no, he says, you're not. He says, well, it's true, he said. Your father was like that, and your lineage is like that. Very worrying people, he said. He says, but you met the Dharma, he says, and you're much too jolly, and you're going to have to watch your weight, he said. And he was 100% right, as he often was, and always almost was, as I remember his things. So, and then, I met a lovely lady. I was married once before, who also I loved and is lovely. But then I left, sadly, I thought I was imitating Buddha, maybe, but not exactly, but not as clean cut as that. But anyway, I left. And then I thought I would be a monk for life. And I was happy as a monk, and I was more happy as a monk. And then, mendicant, but then there's no mendicancy because we don't have free lunch in the modern world, in the industrial world. You have to work all the time. So then I left that. Then I met a wonderful lady that I was deeply in love with. Then I had wonderful children who are really marvelous and wonderful. And I had many great students, and I was fortunate having good teachers, and so I've had a happy time, And actually, even finally, I now realize, lately, I have come to realize that being happy is important for compassion. Compassion doesn't mean that you're supposed to be miserable. Yes, you're supposed to be empathetic, And you're supposed to feel the feeling of others, to be deeply motivated to do something for them. Some people say compassion is not feeling their feeling. That's wrong. It is feeling their feeling, but it's going beyond being bogged in their feeling. It's feeling it in such a way that it makes you want to be happy to help them be happy. Because it goes along with the wisdom that if you just join them in being miserable, that's not going to help them at all. So that's empathy, but it's not compassion, because it won't help them. You both just be, hey, when was it that you had a big pain or something in your stomach? You had indigestion, or you had eaten bad something and you had real big pain, and then somebody comes up and sits down and says, oh, I ate the same thing and I feel equally horrible. Well, what good does that do you?
Right.
There's some cheerful person who comes with some Pepto-Bismol or whatever, helps you, then you like that,
Tell us about the Tibet House, or if people want to learn more about Buddhism.
Oh, yes.
Teaching.
Well, you see that. Yes, I founded the Tibet House at the request of His Holiness the Dalai Lama to save the culture with its Buddhist undercurrent, a Buddhist, Buddhist structure, they could say, or structurelessness, whatever. And because I was through Tibet, because I tried to find this in India, and it's been forgotten in India. There's Hinduism and other kinds of theism there, and there's yoga, and there's many great things. But the direct recognition of this therapy was not there. Indirectly, it's all interfused in all of Hinduism anyway, but because they were together for 1,500 years, 1,600 good years. But so it's fine, but even without it, although now the Tibetans have brought it back in the last 70 years as an interesting byproduct of the horrible Holocaust that they have suffered. So Tibet House is meant to be cultural embassy, and it's not a Buddhist center in the sense of it's not a member of a particular, it's not a church, in other words, that promoting a particular sect or school of Tibetan Buddhism. All of the members of all the schools of Tibetan Buddhism come and give lectures there. Also members of the Bön form of Buddhism, which is a non-Buddhist form of Buddhism. I know that's complicated. I don't have time to explain, but it is. They give lectures there. And Christian mystics and yogis and Hasidics and Kabbalists and people, they go there and do things. And we have even Jewish weddings in Tibet House, but then they put tefillin over the icons, not to be idolatrous. But then they have weddings because they like the atmosphere. Because it is an open Tibetan atmosphere. The 5th Dalai Lama in the 17th century gave land to the Christian missionaries, to the two different kinds of Muslims, the Sunnis and the Shiites, from Uyghur and from Kashmir. And, the Tibet is beyond being a denominationalist and dominationist like that, although that doesn't mean every Tibetan is. It doesn't mean every Buddhist is, by any means, But the basic drive of it is to be like that. And so that's what we're trying to do. And we're not the only one. We're the first one in the West. The first one was in New Delhi, and the Indian people supported, and the government. It's a different institution than a Tibetan community center, which we've helped build, and they've done a lot of their own work on it in Queens, where the Tibetan are. And they have a wonderful community center. They bought a big Korean church complex finally after working for 30 years. And but they're paying off. We help them when we can. We're not really wealthy because nobody thinks that Tibet should exist.
Say a little bit about Menla, because you also give extraordinary programs on it.
Yes, well, the thing was that initially, when we founded Tibet House, I had the wonderful partnership of Richard Gere, who is a celebrity, and which I'm not. And Richard helped us begin to develop it, but he was surprised it was so difficult because, people just think China made a lot of propaganda, and people think they just owned it, and they own it, and what's the point, And it's not so, And there's some people who politically want to fight China about it, and that was not our thing. Ours is just saving the culture. So when they were with me, but then some of our celebrities who helped us get started in the late 80s, during the 80s when we started, they were attracted to try to be more activist. You know, they didn't think keeping the culture alive was when the whole people were still being killed was good, and they wanted to get out and lobby and go to Washington and be politically activist. So they joined up with the Campaign for Tibet, which is like a political lobbying, international political lobbying group of Tibetans that they try to go to UN and here and there, and they make some noise, and occasionally they help a political prisoner get free, etc. But basically, they have not been able to turn the tide. And it's hard to be super activist when your leader says he's going to get along with the people you're protesting against, you know. But he is the right policy, because he should, you know, it's a unique thing. The Dalai Lama has conducted an independence movement for 7 decades, which does not advocate the use of any kind of violence, which advocates the use of dialogue and getting the oppressor and the genocider to think again and to stop doing it, and to realize it's more in their own enlightened self-interest to support the life of the people they're crushing, you know, and you don't fight them. It's against fighting them, and that's something unique. It's like Gandhi got independent from the Brits with the nonviolent movement, but nobody ever saw it as an international thing, appealing against an international enemy, a foreign enemy. In a way, Gandhi did it with a huge majority in his own homeland. But the Tibetans doing it from around the world with only the good-hearted people of America. Therefore, it's a very difficult thing to make as a political movement. So then I lost, anyway, some of the celebrities. So then I didn't know what to do. And the Dalai Lama asked me, some of them were even saying, well, Tibet House has accomplished its mission. We had a lot of art shows. And I thought when Tibet House was formed in 1987, the Carlisle Hotel, His Holiness gave a speech that when he really needed Tibet House would be 30, 40 years from then, when he would be elderly, and what he had done preserving Tibetan culture in Dharamsala in exile would be dissipating, and the Tibetans would be diffusing everywhere, the exiles, and things might still not be any better. And at that time, he wanted us to be making grants like he does from Dharamsala all over the world to anybody supporting Tibetan culture. And that's what he wanted us to do, you know, and to partner with Tibet House New Delhi, and also support other Tibet houses in other capitals. Like one of the things we did, we supported a Tibet House in Mexico City. Then a Lama friend of mine is inspired, who I wanted to get to come to work at Tibet House in New York, but then instead he stayed in Germany where he was, and he created a beautiful Tibet House in Frankfurt. And another one of our supporters created a beautiful one in Barcelona. And then they got the idea in Tokyo and Taipei and Moscow even. But they all in different stages of this and that, you know. So because, again, it's very difficult, because it's not a religious church for people to support. It's not some sort of activist thing to feel righteous that you're denouncing the oppressor. It's you love the oppressor. You know, other people have the slogan, Save Tibet and Free Tibet. But Tibet House has the slogan, Love Tibet. Love as a weapon, I don't know. But then, so finally, coming back to the question, I apologize. Coming back to the question, the night that His Holiness insisted that Tibet House had just begun, far from being finished, around 1992 that was, when we finished the Year of Tibet, I was really feeling pressed, because no money, no celebrity, just a professor, you know, the day job and too many kids and busy all the time. And how am I going to do this? And I had this dream. And in the dream, I realized that why my Mongolian teacher made me study Tibetan medicine, which is similar to Ayurveda. And it's from the Buddhist medicine of India, actually, like the Buddhist form of Ayurveda. And then why I traveled for years with different Tibetan physicians in Europe and America and Latin America. The Dalai Lama's great physician, Yishi Dundan, who passed away recently after receiving the Padma Shri Award from the Indian government because he healed so many Indians, and he helped them, so many of them. And I had this vision of lots of Tibetan medical spas and healing centers, and even hospitals in countries where it was a legal medical form, like in India it is, and Bhutan, and sort of in China, at least commercially. And I saw it all over the world being very helpful to balance the materialist medicine, you know, the industrial medical industry, which really is held back in its effectiveness by its materialist scientific materialist dogma. And it needs the help of these indigenous things, of Tibet being one of them, with most very sophisticated, but there are many of them. And they need to interact, you know, sort of more earthy kind of thing. And I saw a vision like that, and I realized that Tibetans themselves will definitely preserve their culture no matter where they are, when they realize that their medical healing system, spiritual healing, physical healing, psychological healing, will be much appreciated by people around the world. And it will become integrated with the materialist, for all the good things that the materialist system does, and it will help moderate the stupid things that they do, the excessive surgery, the excessive chemistries, and high-tech things when not dealing with regular nutrition, for example. So then I went around begging like a mendicant, an ex-mendicant with my begging bowl, saying, wouldn't somebody please give me a spa that I can bring some Tibetan doctors to, and we can start showing what they know, but in a spa way, so they're not conflicting with the AMA and things. And you know, after some years, finally someone gave one, and lock, stock, and barrel, and near New York. And it was wonderful. And then, of course, my poor wife, who is the CEO of it, I just give talks, but she's the CEO. And so we worked hard through our 70s and 60s because of it. If we hadn't been given that, we might have been more low-key. But we had to build it up here. And we happen to live only 20 minutes away from it. You know, so people can go there and have a retreat. They can meditate. They can have the beautiful nature. They can enter the mandala of the medicine Buddha. And they can, and we don't really practice as medicine because it's not legal, but we have the advice of Tibetan medical doctors who visit often and who we totally collaborate with.
It's extraordinary, Dr. Thurman, your lifetime of essentially accomplishments, how much you've given to us, to all our viewers and our listeners who in fact are interested in more information. They can definitely contact Tibet House, they can contact Menla, or they can read your countless books that you've written. There is just such a body of gift that you have given the world. And
well, we haven't finished.
No, absolutely.
The Dalai Lama promised his people to live to 110. He was predicted by ancient prophecy he could live to 113, but he's copped out on 3 years, and he's saying 110. And then he ordered me to stay, which would make me 104 at that time. So I still have a quarter century to slave away, I think, which I enjoy. Don't worry, I'm not whining. I'm not complaining. I really enjoy it.
We enjoy it more. And by the way, on behalf of all our viewers and our listeners, the entire Open Heart Conversations family, and the entire United Palace of Spiritual Arts community, Dr. Thurman, thank you so much.
That's one. Thank you, Heather, and thank you, Don Jose Miguel. I like the way you say that, Jose Miguel. You say them together.
Un placer, caballero.
Un placer.
Thank you very much.
Mucho gusto. And then, gracias. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, indeed. Absolutely, sir. Thank you so much, Dr. Thurman. This is a real honor and an extraordinary.
Okay, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much. Take care. Good luck to everyone with your spiritual arts. Okay, bye.